well, I guess we can go ahead and begin. It's after 6. My name is not Michael Terry. It is Trey. This is Michael was the facilitator before me. He wrote this, and so Everett and John had already written the responses, and as it got, I kept saying, I'm going to write a whole different perspective, and it just got a little late in the game. I said, well, I agree with this enough that I'll just use it, and that way Everett and John won't just scramble to write something in a week and a half or 2 weeks or whenever I sort of made the decision. So it's part compassion and empathy. That's what we learned about on Thursday night, I believe. And it's also, thank you for laughing at that, by the way. But it's also part laziness and taking credit where credit's not deserved, that I haven't done this. So I'm going to augment this a little bit as I'll explain kind of as we go. I will say that if you didn't know, the resurrection is like the biggest deal in Christianity. It's why we saved it to the end. I didn't make that decision, but that's my understanding among the facilitators. And it's kind of convenient. If it had been a week earlier, it would be even better because Easter was last Sunday. If you're going to ask about the Easter calendar, please, I have no idea. There's a good answer. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
No, I'll wait until then. It's cool.
Okay.
I'll keep it up here. Okay.
Write it down. Whatever else. But yeah. So the Apostle Paul basically says that if Jesus wasn't resurrected, we're all a bunch of idiots and no one should listen to us. I think that there are plenty of atheists who think that about Christians. Maybe some of you in this room. I hope that if I've got to know you, for the few of you that I have, you don't think that I'm a total idiot. Maybe just like severely misguided or something. But the resurrection is a big deal to us, and for several reasons. One, as I was talking to Brad about, we think that Jesus, that his death and resurrection and ascension is typical. And what I mean is it's a type. It's showing what happens to believers. We think that Jesus died. His spirit went up to heaven. There are some folks historically that say that he went and did stuff in hell. I don't think there's any support for that. The spirit went up to heaven. Then he was resurrected with his body, and then ascended to go be with the Father. And we believe that someone in Christ who dies, their spirit goes to heaven, the body stays here just like Jesus did. At the great resurrection, at the last day kind of thing, they'll be reunited to the body, and then they'll be with God forever. And so that's one of the big things. Paul's like, look, Christ's resurrection is everything. So that's why we're talking about this tonight in large part, and why I'll be presenting on this. I'm going to be approaching this from a historical standpoint. There's sort of two attacks, if you will, two prongs of the resurrection apologetic. One is existential. It's sort of, this is like I feel like I know about the resurrection. I've seen what Christ has done to me and that sort of thing. I don't think that's altogether illegitimate. I don't think you find it very compelling. And the other is historical. I'd love to be able to approach it from a scientific standpoint, but that would be rather difficult. It'd be like trying to prove that Caesar Augustus existed, trying to prove it scientifically. You just couldn't do it. Maybe if you were omniscient, then you could collect all those molecules together and do all the gene sequencing or whatever you have to do to show that he existed. But there's only one person in this room who's omniscient, the living God. So I hope that you appreciate my humor somewhat, and at least don't find it offensive.
We do.
Well, look, some of this about how authentic these records are, I'm going to breeze through it. For one reason, we covered this already. We talked about the authenticity of the New Testament on the very first deeper questions, and I think that there's sort of a general consensus that we have more or less what these New Testament writers wrote. That if you want to do the textual criticism studies and everything else, you'll find some variances, but almost none of it strikes the system of doctrine. And typically it's like the differences between the manuscripts we have, like one will say Christ, another will say Jesus, and then a third will say Jesus Christ. Like you get the same thing either way. So we've got a ton of these manuscripts. And they're all dated really early. I kind of mentioned, or Michael mentions this, that you've got Caesar's Gallic Wars. The earliest manuscript is like 900 years after his death. You've got the work of the Greek historian Thucydides, and they're like 1,300 years after his death. And Alexander the Great, the earliest history of his life, was written about 450 years after his death. So the point of saying all these things is that if you look at anything in ancient history and believe it, right, then you've got to give the New Testament records some credit, because there's so many more. There's so much more manuscript evidence. There's so much earlier, and there's so much more attestation that they far exceed a lot of these other ancient manuscripts. So this kind of leads me to then the important question: what does it say? Michael doesn't really cover this because he just sort of says, "Hey, look, this stuff, it's all important. It's all, authentic and really important." Next. And so I think that we ought to at least look for a little bit at what it says. And I think that the New Testament, sort of the four Gospels and 1 Corinthians 15, they agree on several things. They agree that Jesus died on the cross, was crucified, right? That he was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. The tomb was empty and found by women. Paul doesn't agree on this, but he doesn't disagree on it either. He appeared to several followers and non-followers. Saul of Tarsus was not necessarily a follower of Christ when he appeared to him. And lastly, that despite having every predisposition to the contrary, the original disciples and Paul and James, who were both skeptics, suddenly and sincerely came to believe that Jesus Christ had risen bodily from the dead. It was not a spiritual resurrection. We're going through Mark, and so I don't just want to be like general New Testament stuff, and so I'll camp out for like 3 minutes in Mark. In Mark, you see all five of these either explicitly stated or implied. You see that Jesus died on the cross. That was pretty obvious. That he was buried in the tomb. The tomb was empty and found by women. Mark says that the women saw where he lay. And even in number 4, you've got the fourth one, that he appeared to several followers and non-followers. I don't take the last half of Mark 16 as Mark's original writing. The sort of handling snakes and drinking poison stuff. It's just not in the earliest manuscripts that we have. But you do see, where did I even have this? Oh, it's stated as a future event in verse 7. I'll pull it up. I'll read it real quick. Mark 16:7. Which I was getting really nervous that I was an idiot. Jesus says, "Go tell his disciples and Peter that he, being Jesus, is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." That not he being Jesus, the angel, this man in clad white, whatever, he tells the women, "Go tell these guys that Jesus is coming to see you." So there's even sort of this appearance thing that Mark gives some lip service to that. And the fifth point, that despite having every predisposition to the contrary, these original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that Jesus risen bodily from the dead. It's implied. Mark wouldn't be written without it, right? I mean, this just seems obvious, that the fact that Mark's written, that you see it. Outside of Mark, if you say, oh, well, this could be kind of a one-off event, I think that these different facts of his death, burial, resurrection, and so forth gain a lot of attestation. This 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul kind of, you still recall that it reads a little funny if you think that he's making it up. But he says, "For I delivered to you," this is 1 Corinthians 15:3, "as of first importance what I also received." And what's he delivering? This is what he's delivering. That Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, or Peter, then to the 12. And he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom were still alive, those some had fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he also appeared to me. And then he kind of goes on. Bart Ehrman, not exactly like a friend of Christians, dates this tradition back to possibly within a year of Jesus' death. So Paul is drawing on this tradition. This means that within a year, possibly even months of Jesus' death, according to Ehrman, who I think that most folks would say has at least studied this stuff a little bit, that Christians believe this. So it's a very, very early date, right? Really early, and it's pretty strong evidence. Further, Matthew, Luke, and John agree on all 5 of these facts, and they do so independently of one another. I noticed on Facebook that some of you that I'm friends with kind of posed this difficulty of there's these different accounts, and they seem like they don't match up. Well, first, they do all match up on the 5 facts that I mentioned, which is sufficient in and of itself, I think. But second, in some ways, that if you have independent accounts, it shows that there's actually more attestation. Does that kind of make sense? Like, if it's like they're going to they're getting this stuff from different sources, which means that there are more people who have seen this, more people that have been talking about this, and we can. You can certainly ask questions about the discrepancies between these accounts. I just don't know if I have time to really go through them. And honestly, I'm not even sure I have all the info there. I studied a fair amount for this, but I didn't get too much into getting a harmony of these resurrection accounts. I do think that these discrepancies can be reconciled, but discrepancies definitely don't mean that something didn't happen. You have a bunch of accounts that don't seem to agree with one another. From a historian point of view, that doesn't mean you say, well, let's throw them all out. So we kind of move to the second part of I guess I can ask for questions from sort of the biblical part. That'd be the fair thing to do from what I've just said. Before we go to the circumstantial evidence. And this is where I'm going to talk about some of the different alternative theories of the resurrection.
I guess on the point of that these different accounts have a core of overlap. That's a pretty tiny core, given all the other stuff that isn't overlapping. And so I think that as I understand, the concern is not so much that there's a core. I think we agree that they're saying some same things, but there's a difference between saying that Jesus first appeared to the disciples on a mountain in Galilee, which is a really important. The first gospel really emphasizes that, and that he appears to them in Jerusalem. And that's a really important part of the third gospel, and then that he appears to them sort of in a few different. The fourth gospel, he appears to them sort of in Jerusalem, and then he appears to them, they seem from a boat on someone. Those are not the same thing.
Sure. Although I don't think it's a really small core to say, when speaking of something of this magnitude, that he died, he was buried, the tomb was empty and found by a bunch of women who couldn't even be used as legal witnesses in court. Like, I mean, it's embarrassing to the disciples that women found them to begin with, but then you couldn't even use their testimony in court. And then he appeared, that there's all these appearance stories. Like, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a small thing, like a small core, because it's a pretty big core when you're talking about a dude that gets resurrected. And I think that I really do think that those can be reconciled somewhat. I mean, even if you mentioned Luke's gospel with Jerusalem. Luke's gospel almost reads as if it's like the next day, all these things happen, and then Jesus ascends. But then when you look at the beginning of Acts, Luke, and whether you think it was Luke or not, everyone agrees that the same dude wrote Luke and Acts. He talks about that there's 40 days and he appeared to a whole bunch of people. So I'm not sure that even Luke's account is meant to be read strictly chronologically. And there's even some stuff in the end of Luke 24 where you see some temporal things, and then you don't see temporal things, like temporal Greek words, and then you don't see them. So I do think that they can be reconciled. I haven't spent, I think it'd take a lot of time for me to study them and do it. And I'm not even sure I could do it. I'm sure there's someone who has. I just need to find them. But I'm not sure that they're necessarily like contradicting each other either.
What about, for example, so another big part of this is when Jesus ascends to heaven, you have three different sources. One saying he ascended in Galilee, one on Mount Olivet, and one in Bethany. So it's like those are, I guess, contradictory because they're three different places that he, ascended to heaven. So I guess those can't be reconciled. But,
yeah, I have to look at those again. I'll be honest with you. I don't know the answer to them off the like right here, and that's a failing on my part.
One of the most striking things for me about the historical apologetic to the resurrection is the modesty of its claims that appear to me to be sufficient for coming to the resurrection of Jesus as the best possible explanation. So the modesty of the claim about the empty tomb is not that is that it's just that the tomb was empty. We're not historically we do not have to know who discovered the empty tomb, or the exact specifics of where Jesus appeared. Only that Jesus appeared, and so the modesty of the claim said only that the tomb was found, that he appeared to somebody somewhere and many people, and that he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. I mean, these things I think help us a great deal in coming very close to what they might call like historical certainty, or at least beyond a reasonable doubt of, well, it gets into a philosophical discussion about that after that, about miracles. But the big thing to remember is not to get off track, in that we're not making any claims about who discovered the tomb first, not making any claims about where exactly he showed up in this historical sense. And we're not making any claims about the societal impact. Just that the disciples, when they had no real reason to suddenly believe that their leader had risen bodily from the dead, which is interesting because I think historically that has no precedent. You've got people rising spiritually from the dead all the time in ancient times. But if anybody ever said that they had seen a relative after they were dead in ancient times, that was just evidence that they were dead. I mean, obviously it's just you've seen a ghost, and that's cool because we're ancient people, and we're down with that. But all that does is prove that they were dead. This bodily resurrection stuff is.
I'm surprised they didn't give a description of his body and how the condition that it was in, because if it's been stabbed, and did they say it was restored?
Well, they did. I mean,
Yeah.
And I believe it's John. Thomas puts his hand in his side where he had been pierced, and then in his hands or wrist, depending on where the nails have been driven through. So they do actually. He maintains the scarring even after his resurrection.
Thomas, what was he like? One of the
One of
writers
the disciples.
about the resurrection?
No, he's one of the disciples. John recorded. You've heard of doubting Thomas, like this term. That's where it comes from. It's from
So I heard he appeared to 500 people.
I think that Luke records that, right? Yeah. I saw your hand up. You've been patient over there. Did you have
Question for Curry?
Yeah.
Right. So we're not to worry about who made the claims
What's to stop someone from making another extraordinary claim and then saying, hey, you can't question me because this person.
Right. Well, I'm not at all saying that we shouldn't care about who made the claims. I think that's important.
Okay.
I'm talking about these minute details, rather than these modest claims about the tomb and the appearances and.
What about the people that saw the tomb? Because it was the two Marys in one account. It was just Mary in another. It was two other people in another, and it was Paul and
Peter and John, I think,
Yeah.
the ones that got there after
And-
somebody
and
else told them about it.
they are all very different people that
Right.
are talked about more than once. And I would hope that they would know the difference between these people enough to when they're writing about the most important part of the doctrine that they wouldn't get it wrong.
Yeah, no, see, and I'm not approaching this as a biblical inerrantist at this point. In that case, I would say, well, we need to see if there's any sort of possible harmonization. But historically, if the first gospel says X and Y saw the tomb first, the second gospel says Z and Q saw the tomb first, and the third gospel says A and B saw the tomb first, what remains is that the tomb was empty. I mean, the tomb was discovered empty. And I actually think that all of them agree that it was women, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Women followers.
Well, it was like women, or then briefly afterwards, somebody told Peter and John, and
Right,
they ran
right.
with
First Corinthians says first and then 12.
Yeah, well, I think
But
what I have in 1 Corinthians is that on the third day, in accordance with the scripture, that he appeared to Cephas,
Yeah.
then to the 12. But, and I'm not going to be super nitpicky, but that doesn't necessarily exclude women.
Right.
Like it could be, Paul knew he appeared to women, but given to who he's writing to put women at the top would only undermine what he's trying to get across. So he could say, he appeared to Cephas, then it's like, these people that you trust, guys, Corinth guys who are doing all kinds of stuff that's crazy, like, you trust these people. Because we've already talked about at the beginning how you tried to follow all sorts of different, but you'll trust Cephas.
Right.
But if you put women, you wouldn't. So I'm not sure that necessarily excludes women.
But in two other accounts, though, they mention women only, and don't even mention men. So if that were the case, like, wouldn't it be better to say that no one saw it than just the women? Or
See, this is the interesting part about this thing in 1 Corinthians 15 is that it was probably memorized. You know, it's a memorized sort of system thing. You know,
that's
whatever.
good.
And so that's what's interesting about it is that you see that the women have been etched out. I mean, it's embarrassing that the women are there, and I think that makes the Gospels more trustable because the women haven't been etched out. It would be strange for the women to be an invention afterward, because that would hurt the credibility of the claims.
Right.
This memorized thing, in its own way, is more trustable because of the fact that it etched the women out, because it looks to be more respectable. You know?
just briefly, I mean, you like mentioned like the empty tomb, like that's the constant thing. I was just gonna point out briefly, like the fact that the tomb was empty, that's not that extraordinary of a claim, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
I would actually use that as support, because why in the world would Paul and James believe if it's just an empty tomb? It's like, so what?
well, no, I'm just saying, I was just pointing out, like, I really don't have like a dispute with an empty tomb. Like the point, the thing would be more like whether or not the interactions with Jesus would be reliable, and whether or not the tomb was empty. That doesn't really make a lot of difference because obviously we know there are plenty of ways to like, you know, get somebody out of it, you know, like move somebody or something. I mean,
They're mutually interpretive. So if you've got appearances in a tomb that isn't empty, that obviously negates the appearances. But if you've got an appearances and a tomb that is empty, then that makes it more interesting.
sure, I understand. I'm just saying though that like tomb being empty is not an extraordinary claim.
I think it's
Dead guy going, like,
I think it
that's
actually is a
extraordinary.
little bit more extraordinary, as we'll talk about, because there is the question of how in the world did he get empty? And we'll talk about some different theories for that.
There are obvious ones. The body could have been moved. I mean,
Well, that's not...
just simple.
Unless the disciples all of a sudden turned into SEAL Team 6, I'm not sure they're going to get past these Romans.
Please.
I mean, like, you station a bunch of Roman guards there and they sealed the tombs. Like, I mean,
But that's also not in all the accounts, though, as I recall. The guards are only there in a couple of accounts. And I think they're the later ones. I don't think they're in Mark.
Yeah, they're not.
And Mark is the earliest, at least dating-wise, account. So, like, that could have been an added-in thing later, too. We don't know. To, like, lend more credibility. Like, oh, yeah, they couldn't have gotten past. If there were Roman guards there, they couldn't have gotten by. So it had to be supernatural. You see what I'm saying? Like,
but it still wouldn't explain James and Paul's conversions who were skeptics already. Just like it wouldn't explain, you wouldn't go, oh, yeah, all of a sudden, like, because they'd be thinking the same thing. So something happened with those two, especially.
oh, you're talking about, like, the road to
The
Damascus?
road to Damascus, and then James, who didn't believe Jesus was anything. Like, I mean, in the Gospels, it talks about how, like, James didn't believe this stuff. And then all of a sudden, you've got, I mean, this early tradition in 1 Corinthians 15 that he appeared to James, and James also becomes the leader of the church and was martyred and that sort of stuff.
Okay, James was martyred.
Yeah.
And that's what's so killer about that's the sort of the feeder for the movement of the body hypothesis is that it just doesn't have the scope, it doesn't explain all of our data.
Yeah, and we can move into like some of those theories, and because I have them like under this circumstantial evidence. Michael mentions them, and I kind of flesh them out. But,
One more.
yeah, sure.
Quickly.
It's
Earlier
discussion.
you said the Gaius Augustus Caesar and Alexander the Great's biographers came hundreds of years after.
You might have said the text that we
Yeah.
survived.
Right.
Or from later.
Okay.
Okay.
Because the biographers would have been within just a few years of the events.
Even still, I haven't read
Maybe.
the biographies to make.
I have read a lot of it. So.
Okay, so do they make claims of the extraordinary? Like,
No, they're not going to do that.
okay, so and there's
Well,
more than
A
one
lot of it says-
civilization that writes about those things, right? Like when Caesar went to Britain, you had the Moors that would have written about it, and I mean other people.
We don't have a lot of corroboratory evidence outside. It's mostly Roman writings.
Okay,
We don't have like from other people,
Yeah.
but there are a significant amount of Roman
Didn't know,
writings.
that was just a question. Okay.
Suetonius talks about the virgin birth of Julius Caesar.
Yeah, I was just saying
Okay.
there involves a. Yes, there's a few of those.
Also, I would like to say, if those biographers, if the text came much later, if the text we have come much later, and they don't show evidence of mythology growing on them, then I think that would be helpful to say that mythos can't grow on texts for a few hundred years, but it doesn't matter because.
I mean, there are definitely some prominent scholars that would say that like legend takes more than just one or two generations to develop. And so when you have sort of this early tradition in 1 Corinthians 15 and some others that point, that it'd be tough to just already say it's legend.
You mentioned earlier that, I don't know, it was the scholar you quoted, he was talking about something about within a few years or whatever. Now, my understanding was like the earliest writings would have been Paul's letters, and even those would have dated to like
I think James
somewhere
might be
between
earlier, but
25 to 30 years after.
right.
So where is he getting this idea of like just within like a year or two then?
I mean,
because we wouldn't have had any writings from that early.
Ehrman's a very critical scholar. Like, I mean, if any of you know him, he's no friend to Christianity at all.
Right, I know. I'm just wondering
But-
where he's getting his dates from.
I don't know. I haven't researched that specific thing. At the very least, people would say that this tradition, like even folks who aren't going to go. The reason I say Ehrman, I use him, is that I've seen some people who date this tradition within 5 to 10 years. I mean, they have certain ways of dating this. I don't know what they are necessarily. I'm not an expert on this.
He's not talking about a text at all. He's talking about a couple of sentences in
Right.
1 Corinthians 15. Part of that is because Paul is quoting himself as having said that to the recipients previously, and then part of it is some people would say that it's kind of this.
The form of it is
Yeah,
something
it seems
that was
to
memorized.
be kind of a formulaic thing. He's kind of referring back to a
Talking about the whole
quotation.
Like a mini confession of faith or mini catechism
Yeah, like
question type thing.
It's the I appeared to Cephas and the 12. That is he's referring to a quote that was said much earlier.
Like,
And that's
like Philippians 2, when it talks about the Christ hymn, like a lot of folks take that as an earlier tradition, and that he's quoting what people have already been saying. And so that tradition, like whenever that started, they date that in 1 Corinthians. Ehrman dates that back to within like a year, a few months even. And I don't know how he does that. Like he's pretty good, like textual type scholar. We disagree massively on a lot of things, which is why it's even more fun to put him on this, of course. That's what you do, right?
You mentioned that, you kind of briefly brought up that some scholars would say that it takes more than 1 or 2 generations for legends to form. And that's about the amount of time that was in between the death of Jesus and the average time of the writing of the Gospels, 50 to 100 years or so. What then do you think of the miracles of Islam or the Latter-day Saints or Falun Gong or Hinduism, which also have writings within 1 or 2 generations?
But the trouble with that, well, obviously you asked me a question, you didn't say something, but you did. But with the Gospels, like they're writing in what a lot of scholars would say is the genre of biography. Like they're writing as like, this is what happened. Whereas I'm not so sure about some of these other writings. So they're trying to claim like this is what's going on. And so that's why it's a little early for legend to develop and to get into the biography.
And even if all of those, we could let them all happen, we could say that, we could be really, really, free and easy with our skepticism and say, yeah, they all happened. But if the resurrection of Jesus happened, then it would supersede the rest of them.
Well, of course, but so for example, there was an Indian guru who actually just died 2 years ago. Sai Baba was his name.
Who's supposed to come back from the dead? Right?
Well, not necessarily, no, but he lived in modern times, just died recently, and he is on record. Thousands of people will attest to this who are still alive now, will attest to him levitating, raising people from the dead, healing people, conjuring things, and they will attest to it. Thousands of people who are still alive. The mentality that people get when they believe in things, or they want to believe in things, could be questionable.
But the difficulty of that is that, and actually this is a perfect segue into the circumstantial stuff, is that here's a guy who's a total failure. Like Jesus, if he wasn't resurrected, was a complete and abject failure because he teaches all this stuff. He dies, which is not what messiahs are supposed to do in the Jewish conception. He's betrayed by his own, and the rest of his disciples desert him. Like, versus this guy, Sai Baba, that folks, you kind of implied that they sort of believe what they want. Like, the disciples had every reason to write the opposite here. Because if he wasn't resurrected, Jesus was a flop. And there were other Messiah types before and after him that people followed him. When he died, they either moved on, that didn't happen, or it kind of petered out. But with
14 or 15,
Yeah, but we do see other instances in history where this actually came up the last time we were talking about the end time stuff, like the fact that people will go to great lengths to make sure that basically their beliefs weren't in vain, that everyone was saying how they'll keep extending dates on when, because
right.
Okay, it didn't
right.
happen now, so he wasn't really going to come back now. It's
right.
going to happen in
but,
another 100 years, and
sure.
then and then they just keep pushing. Oh, now it's going to be indefinitely.
But the trouble with this is that what Jesus does here, at his death, is contrary to the beliefs. Jewish expectations for Messiah included none of this, and so they would have had to all of a sudden switch everything. It'd be the craziest thing in the world for them to do that. It'd be like I don't even know. I'm trying to think of a modern equivalent, what would have to happen in my life, because it's in some ways this is the antithesis of their beliefs, and so they have to have something remarkable happen for them to all of a sudden start teaching this stuff. That's why I'd say it would be different than the followers of Sai Baba, or even sort of this end times, keep pushing it back, because people are expecting the end times. So when it doesn't happen, they go, okay, well, how can we have this happen? In Jesus' case, they're expecting this big, military revolution guy to come in, and instead he dies a criminal. Like that's he just peters out. So that's why I'm not sure that works as well.
Well, what about this will be moving in a little different area, but as far as, because we talk about this early tradition and things and stuff, and some of the texts that, date to the mid, 2nd century, I guess, and things like that, being like the earliest, like, actual surviving texts we have. Like, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that really Christianity was a rather minor cult, if you will, until Constantine raised it to the level of state religion, if you will.
Right.
I mean, we have, for instance, it's not Suetonius, it might be Pliny. It's a governor in Anatolia, Roman governor in Anatolia in the early 2nd century, and he writes to, I believe it's not Trajan, it's the one that came right after him.
Yeah, I've read it.
Hadrian.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he's got a letter, and he writes a bunch of letters on like all kinds of different things, asking Hadrian what he wants him to do on all these issues. And one of them is he asked him like, all right, I have this group of people. They're called the Christians. I don't really know who they are, or like what they have anything to, and like Hadrian like writes a response. He basically goes, "Who are these people?" Like he never even heard of it.
Right.
And he was emperor of the Roman Empire. And like his point basically was, Pliny like writes him back, kind of tells him a little bit about him or whatever. And he's like, okay, well basically as long as they're not basically fomenting, revolution, and as long as they're not causing trouble, basically. Sure. Just leave them be. Like he says, as long as they don't, my professor here at Duke, he called it the first "don't ask, don't tell" policy. Basically, if they don't like make a big deal out of it and like cause like disruption, just let them, they can practice and do whatever they want.
Sure.
So like this is kind of like the idea that really this was kind of a pretty minor, like it wasn't like this was like a rampant kind of thing. So, was it really like?
I mean, you do see periods of persecution throughout, like the most serious being the Diocletian persecution.
Which was right before
Constantine. But even Nero, I mean, we've got accounts of Nero like blowing up Christians and lighting on fire for his dinner parties.
Yeah, that's like a couple of lines in
1st century.
And no, the guy that wrote like just after, like pretty close following. He wrote during Domitian's reign.
I'm confused, man. Are you saying that because are you saying that if it did not make a huge splash in the beginning, that it's not?
All right. Well, I guess a larger. Like there isn't a lot of other corroborating evidence, shall we say, outside what we have in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Like people talk about even like Josephus and stuff like that, but there really isn't like a lot in a lot of these different places. Like there's a noticeable silence, I guess. And like Plutarch, for instance, who's writing in the early 2nd century, he's writing all these biographies of famous people, and somebody had done like the things like rising from them. That would have been a pretty extraordinary thing. You would have thought that many of these writers would have had like, some mention of him, and the fact that there's like this noticeable silence seems to make it out that it was definitely more of like a localized and maybe just a very smaller thing. And then later, of course, right, when we get to 323, when Constantine makes it like the official religion, and then of course it blows up, and that's why we obviously have like the 5,000 manuscripts too, because then like all these monks started copying them down. That's why we have a lot more of these texts than some of the other things I mentioned.
But there's still several different sources where you see martyrdom, and martyrdom. Like even if it's not like the super widespread thing, I mean, you see martyrdom. Like
that's mostly written later, though, to my knowledge. As far as like the early church history, again, most of that stuff's like the 2nd century. Like as far as the writings go.
2nd century, like it's still not like talk about when the disciples were martyred.
Maybe more though.
But talk about when the disciples were martyred. If they're writing in the 2nd century, that's like 50, 60 years after it actually happened. Like they're martyrdom.
Even if they are martyred, like in China, they imprison, kill, and harvest the organs of thousands of Falun Gong members every year. Yet it's one of the fastest growing religions in the region.
Right, but why would you? But the still question remains of why would you be martyred for a Messiah that didn't do anything to what you expected?
You ask the Falun Gong members.
Tacitus, yeah.
What are you going to say?
Tacitus is
I have something to say, but I want to make sure you have a chance to finish your presentation.
Sure.
before,
Well,
you
we're
know.
actually working through it slowly. It's very odd. Almost there's this invisible hand.
Providence.
I like that. But I mean, you do have, and keep in mind that if folks are dying over this, which there is good reason to think that it happened, you're going to probably have a tight-knit community, and so it's not going to be, it's not like that stuff's going to get passed down. You do have Josephus that talks about Christians getting martyred, who is not a fan, like he's not a Christian.
Right.
And yeah, I've read the Pliny stuff, and he's actually very complimentary of us. He says that they take care of our poor better than we do.
Right.
And so, which is,
Hence why Hadrian responds basically, as long as they don't cause trouble,
Right.
just let them do their thing.
right.
Tacitus was the Roman historian I was trying to think of that like he mentions like 2 lines about Christianity when he talks about Nero.
Yeah.
And he said that like basically he says Nero blames the burning of Rome on the Christians who
Right. Right.
and then he has a line about like from like obviously what he would have heard about it. He said something about their leader was Jesus who we killed or something like
Yeah.
that. That was basically it's a pretty small
Yeah.
mention.
But it's still a mention of Jesus' death, which
Sure.
is, yeah.
On Jesus' death, in Matthew, it talks about old priests that have died.
It talks about what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
The old
And-
saints, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. All those people get resurrected.
Yeah, they get resurrected and walk through the town. Well, trade routes were fairly well established in Jerusalem. You would have traders from other places.
Yeah. he was
Why would you not hear,
Yeah.
even if it were just oral tradition, why were these dead,
The dead walking.
the dead walking, why wouldn't you hear that about that in, say, South in Canaanite or,
Right.
Other parts of the
yeah,
Roman
just
Empire.
any other part
Right.
of
It seems like
the
word was
Mediterranean.
spread a lot
Right.
more than it did.
I don't know. That's my answer. I will say it's an argument from silence,
Okay.
which isn't always the strongest.
Well,
And I mean, a lot of times skeptics kind of throw literacy rates at the time at Christians, and so maybe I can kind of volley that back and say maybe they didn't get written down because
Well,
there's
even,
within-
even not with literacy rates, they don't have to necessarily write them down, but a lot of it was oral tradition for a really long time. Like I would assume that something that important, that's the, like I've never seen someone dead walking around.
I mean,
Like if that would have happened, I would have like,
told
well
about
now
it.
I have a camera so I can take a picture.
Yeah.
some of the things that I've heard,
Maybe they had normal looking bodies. I don't know.
some of the things that I've heard said about this passage, which I haven't studied that particular stretch of scripture extensively, but I've heard said that some scholars think that this is eschatological rhetoric. This is a poetic saying. This is metaphorical for something. I don't know. The other thing I want to say is that coming at it from a historical standpoint, we don't have to look at the Gospels as completely inerrant. I mean, we don't have to believe what Matthew says right there, and it doesn't touch any of the facts that we're trying to explain. I mean,
So on that, if I understand not being the inerrant word of God, but if you how are you able to describe one portion as a metaphor and another as a literary?
Yeah, figurative.
Is something that actually.
Some of it, the word for resurrection, like it has no other meaning but bodily resurrection here. Like there were, they had words for that. And again, this is off the top of my head. Like I couldn't have to do some more on this, but what they're describing is not just spiritual. Like you'd have to take that whole part as metaphor, which I don't even know if you have to. I looked at that one text, and it says that they went into the holy city and appeared to many.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that it could be many Christians. That's where Matthew gets this, and it could be Jesus goes through door. He sort of like almost appears at different points. If they had the same type of resurrection body he did, I would think it would have some of the same properties. This is all conjecture. So maybe they weren't walking around the middle of the street. That's my point.
Okay.
And then it does get recorded. It's just recorded in
Is
Matthew.
it also fair enough to point out that we don't know that Matthew was the one that wrote, right? I mean, like, all the names we attribute to the Gospels are somewhat conjecture, right? And you wouldn't
Right.
consider those to be inerrant, correct?
No,
Because-
but I think there's very good reason to assume as much.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as the 2nd century folks are quoting them, I mean, that's only a couple of generations removed from when they were actually writing them. You see this in, like Origen and Cyprian and some of those guys, Tertullian. So I think that they're as good as any. I'll say that. But
The other thing is the tomb and the post-mortem appearances and the burial, those are multiply tested as opposed to the bodies rising and so on. So that's why we sort of stake the claim on these facts and what is the best explanation of the facts.
keep on, and I'm going to kind of work through some more of this. We can keep asking questions, but I will say that, like, the disciples preached in Jerusalem, right? They preached of Jesus' death and resurrection in Jerusalem. This would have been like the easiest thing in the world to just go to the tomb, because remember, we know what a tomb is. It's Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. He's a prominent member, and just open her up. And if the body's in there, like, you're screwed. So there, some of this circumstantial evidence is kind of where we are right now. Not only do we have this sort of martyrdom, but where they're preaching is significant, where they begin. Let's go through some of these different theories, and just kind of evaluate them and ask questions about these. The conspiracy theory. The disciples stole the body. I think this has several problems. One, I mentioned that they're not SEAL Team 6. They'd be going past Roman centurions. And of course, you could say, well, that's a later addition. What is interesting about the end of Matthew is that it doesn't have the typical Matthean vocabulary. It seems like he's getting this not from his normal source or earlier tradition. That's the way that I take it. He's not just ripping off Mark and adding a few things in there, and Everett's smiling. He's like, I can get you on this.
No, I was actually smiling about something else.
Okay. I'm sure I'll hear it soon. But there's no reason for these certain disciples to die for a lie. I feel like I've brought this point up several times, and since his death would have crushed their expectations for Messiah. Second, it fails to account for the appearances of Jesus. He appeared to these folks. I mean, within a year, 1 Corinthians 15, within a year, there's this tradition that he appeared. It doesn't account for any of these appearances. That early tradition, you could go ask these folks. And you've got Paul and James that just wouldn't believe in the resurrection from the empty tomb. Even if you could go show them, the disciples yanked the body out. They're like, Paul, hey, Paul's on killing us real quick, and let's go look at the empty tomb. Even if he said, okay, we'll have a little parlay, there wouldn't be, it wouldn't be convincing to him. Because he could say, oh yeah, well, you just yanked the body out. N.T. Wright says, nobody in the pagan world would have interpreted an empty tomb as implying resurrection. Everyone knew that such a thing was out of the question. No one in the ancient Jewish world would have interpreted it like that either. Resurrection was not something anyone expected to happen to a single individual while the world went on as normal. Certainly, the disciples were not expecting any such thing to happen to Jesus. Had the tomb had been empty, with no other unusual occurrences, no one would have said that Jesus was the Messiah or the Lord of the world. No one would have imagined the kingdom had been inaugurated.
Where'd you read that, or where'd you get that from?
N.T. Wright, I think it's his Resurrection, Son of God.
Is that specifically talking about their culture? Because, certainly we have plenty of resurrection myths other places. It wasn't that strange to find it in writing. Herodotus talks about, a kettle of fish coming back to life that was dead. It wasn't that out of the ordinary for people to believe in that sort of thing. Certainly other places. I don't know about the Near East particularly.
I want to say that
Greek theology or Greek religion had people rising spiritually from the dead.
I want to say that as far as a bodily resurrection,
That's
some of the first stories were after Jesus.
I thought there was what was the one? I thought there was one of the sects that like the Pharisees and Sadducees. I thought one of them did believe in bodily resurrection, and the other did not.
Yeah, at the last day. That's one of the things that it's actually like the last part of my presentation, that for the Jews, and you can actually look, I think Michael has the 7 sort of mutations from Judaism to Christianity on the resurrection.
Okay.
They believe that the resurrection was kind of this peripheral thing, not central. But one of them was that it'd be a full-on, like, last day resurrection.
Oh, okay.
So for an individual to be resurrected just wasn't even in their scheme at all.
It was almost like saying it happened today. I mean, like it was that kind of out of there. Like,
But the second theory is the swoon theory, that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. I mean, the first problem is that this is sort of medically impossible, given what he went through, stabbed, and there's some MDs that published in the Journal of American Medical Association, which I thought would be an odd place to publish about this, but it's sort of their findings that Jesus really died on the cross. But second, even if it was true, Jesus couldn't have rolled a stone away and fought off these guards. And maybe he had help, but no one would have believed him. Like if you're appearing to people with all this stuff that's happened, even if you didn't get speared in the side, but you're all bloody and torn up, he wouldn't be believable to the disciples or to anyone else. There's this wrong tomb theory, that the women went to the wrong tomb, and so they go, oh, look, it's empty, there's no one here. But the problem with this is that, did the women really just kind of get their stuff and wander around until they hit pay dirt? Like, this doesn't, it seems like it takes some of the gospel accounts, but then, like, not others. It's very selective and evidence, because Mark tells us that they saw where he lay. Also, a mere empty tomb wouldn't have convinced Paul and James, this is going to be my response for like half of these. And the old open her up test. During the preaching, all you had to do is go open this up. Oh, well, see, the women saw this, guys. It's real. Okay, well, let's just walk to the tomb and open it up. And there's Jesus. But it fails that test too. One of the more common theories is this hallucination theory. This is the one that I think is most common today. Many folks would say this one has the most holes in it. I don't know. But the first one...
swoon theory?
Huh?
More than the swoon?
Oddly so.
Yeah.
I think in scholarship, the swoon theory would be more common a couple decades ago. But I think that a lot of the critical scholars now kind of hold. Richard Carrier, he holds to sort of the hallucination theory, for example.
Okay, well,
That's
I was just guessing. No major. Well, if we need to count Richard Carrier as a major scholar, then okay. But
I don't like his word.
yeah, he's a guy that does some cool stuff in areas other than this.
He wrote the empty tomb, though. That's something, right?
Well, I'm just saying. We'll probably have more to say about the hallucination bit in a bit, but I know of no major humanist scholar who would care about who would say anything about the swoon theory.
Well, good for them. I'm glad.
As far as the psychological thing goes, though, we do have evidence. For instance, grief can induce some things. We have. You probably heard stories. Might know people. You hear things like somebody loses a really good friend or something and claims that they saw them at night or something.
Yeah.
And, grief can induce some pretty kind of vivid, even images and things. I don't know that one. I think that one actually certainly could hold up. If these people, like you said, they were devastated by losing him, because that, like you said, it seemed everything we thought was for naught or whatever. But but then you could have some very vivid,
Sure.
visions.
Well, I agree with you, but I've never talked to, and I don't think there are very many, if any, documented cases in the psychology world of a group of friends having the same hallucination at the same time. The nature of hallucination is
individual.
it's according to psychologists.
It's a what?
Hallucinations are by definition a product of one mind.
Somebody going to explain what the swoon theory is?
That Jesus didn't really die. He just, when you swoon, it's where you look like you died. And so he didn't really die on the cross. They take him off. They think he's dead. They put him in the tomb, and then keep in mind that if he swoons, I mean,
It could have been a Romeo and Juliet scenario where the monk gives them the drug that makes you
Right.
look like you're dead.
right. I mean, I will say that these Roman soldiers were pretty good at their job when it came to executing people, right?
And it was their life.
Like that. That's sort of like when your job is to kill people.
Yeah.
Like you're probably pretty good at it.
I'm not giving this any credibility. We actually have. There was quite a few people that did escape crucifixion because most times, this wasn't particularly the case with these guys because they had to be killed because the Sabbath was coming. But most times they would crucify them and they would leave them because you could survive for days
Right.
on the
Right.
cross
If you're strong enough
without
you're not
dying.
supposed
And so that we actually do. There are cases where like
to- Sure.
relatives and people, like the guards, would be like, "We're not going to keep hanging around here," and they'd walk off, and like people would come and take them down, and actually
Yeah.
would survive.
But the thieves on either side of them with their legs broken.
Right.
Because it's like we need
Because
to
they had to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, John.
I mean, the flip side of all these other theories, though, is that there is a conspiracy to get these writings and pack them together in such a way that they all corroborate each other in a vague way, so as to manipulate, public opinion or a group of people in order to believe specifically. Right? I mean, I think that as much as we can pick apart all these other theories, that it's worth knowing that I would say virtually everybody in this room would say that that's more likely than any of the other theories posed about his resurrection.
Except.
That it's
We're going to be getting
But
into
it's-
Hume's argument here quick.
But except, right. But the thing is, though, if the other theories, like historically, are unreasonable, then there's only two options. That either there's a theory we haven't thought about, which people really been thinking about this one for a while. Like if you believe the Matthew account, like he says, "Hey, look, these guys came up with a theory that the disciples stole the body." Like this would indicate that like people have been trying to think up things for 1900 years or more of why this didn't happen. So we either haven't thought of the theory in 1900 years, but it's there, or all these theories are wrong. The resurrection is the most historically plausible explanation.
Because I was wondering when we were getting to Hume, because Hume in his famous
Right.
little treatise of miracles, like he
Right.
talks about the only time you should believe this supernatural event occurred is when the natural explanation would be basically more fantastical than the supernatural
Right.
one.
Right.
So I mean, like I would say, we'll even take the swoon theory as like I didn't even know that was a thing, to be honest, until now. But
Right.
but even that, as like ridiculous as that seems, is more plausible than somebody like rising from the dead, because
Right.
we've never seen that anywhere
But
else.
it doesn't explain the facts, though. It doesn't explain why Paul and James would convert.
More
It gives
so than
zero explanation to that, or why the disciples would suddenly and sincerely go from mourning and like this, we lost, guys. We followed the wrong dude, to
Right.
now like dying for him.
And I'll say this: the reigning sort of ideas about miracles today in philosophy is not the old Humean thing. I mean, philosophy.
And
is
Hume's
that-
got problems, jerk.
Like Hume was writing a long time ago. People have written since then, obviously. But right now, so far as I understand it, it's the probability is measured by how the likelihood that you would see the evidence that you do have in light of the background knowledge. Okay, so the background knowledge of what we know about the society and everything about that, and the things that we have, these facts, the empty tomb, the burial, the post-mortem appearances, and the sincere belief of the disciples, on the backdrop of Judeo-Hellenistic beliefs of the day about death, about resurrection, about all that stuff. That's what actually measures the probability. It's not Hume's idea. I don't think that reigns.
Hume is still very relevant today. I mean, most people would still talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely offered up as a critique against miracles. Although it's not a critique against miracles, it's a critique against believing in miracles. That's
Right.
key. He never,
No,
in his
you're
critique,
right.
he never says miracles don't happen. It's just
No, he
should
just
you
said
believe them or
like
not?
you should only believe them. Yeah,
Right.
no.
And also the problem with Hume, of course, is that what he's saying, if you reduce it down to sort of the core of what he's saying, it means that anytime someone presents something to you that is paradigm breaking, that you shouldn't believe it. Which, like,
At the beginning of the
Or at
universe.
least you should be very skeptical.
the birth of a child to someone who's never heard of this, like if someone told you, oh yeah, a child was born by a woman, like a man and a woman doing this whole number, and then it coming out of her lady parts, you'd be like, no. Like until you saw it. And I would argue that most of you in here believe things you haven't seen.
Somewhat, but
All of
again,
you.
it's about the evidence for it. Like I would, to be honest, I would argue that that person could be correct in saying that.
Sure.
Because I think you should demand evidence of it. But the thing is like that evidence is readily attainable.
Sure.
Like
sure.
you could find a video of a birth if you wanted to watch that sort of thing. You could do it. I mean, it's not that difficult. Like I think that the point is like you can find evidence of like these claims.
But even one-off events, though, you could. I mean, like, whether there's some like asteroid coming close to Earth, never did again. Like the stuff that, like when that asteroid came in, and you can find other asteroids, but like that it happened that day. If you'd never seen an asteroid, according to Hume, you should never believe that happened, because it'd be paradigm breaking. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna. Sorry. I was just. I mean, I don't think we even need to reach you because
I don't either.
I think. Can I defend the hallucination?
Yeah.
For a minute,
I didn't even really get
because the reality is on page 51, I provided a very beautiful example of a mass hallucination.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the founding of the LDS is rooted in this belief that there were 11 people who went into the woods and watched another person have an interaction with an angel, and there was physical touching of objects, and these were people that were who stuck with it. Smith's brother, Hiram Smith, was martyred rather brutally for his beliefs. They stuck. Most of the witnesses, if not all of them, stuck with it. Wrote about it extensively. They were interviewed in the press. There were. They got. I mean, in terms of everything we're talking about here, whether it's textual preservation or multiple attestation of witnesses or groups of witnesses seeing things simultaneously. I mean, it's all there. But can I give another one too?
I would say briefly, it's not all there because you don't have folks that were opposed to this movement that are attesting to it because it's two families. It's Smith and the I forget the other one's names, but they're all buddies, and so it's like you could just as easily say they all got together and planned this thing out. Whereas I think that you wouldn't even say that all the gospel writers got together to sort of plan this thing out. I mean,
there's motive on their part. Where's the motive in the gospel?
Further,
It
I mean,
could be the same.
you have a background society that has these things happen. I mean, in the difference is that in the resurrection of Jesus' case, the background of society did not think it was possible for somebody to rise bodily from the dead. This type of thing was possible in the minds of, where is this? The United States.
you just don't.
Finish your point, because there's a good response to that. But.
Oh, well then I will just talk until 7:30 and then. The background beliefs of the place where they were, this is not a paradigm breaking thing.
I'm still curious about that though, because you mentioned like the Hellenistic world, and certainly in the Hellenistic world, many fantastical things are believed.
Yeah,
So
but not a physical resurrection
Yeah.
from the dead.
But
According to Wright did this big long survey of both Jewish and Hellenistic belief, and a physical body rising from the dead isn't present in those beliefs. And even if you look in the Old Testament and in apocryphal texts, you don't
gods
see.
rise from the dead in mythology.
Gods died in mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did.
wow.
Greek mythology,
but-
yeah. Like that's what I'm saying. Like Greek mythology, like there's a lot of precedent for. I want to even say like some of the Babylonian, like other Near Eastern stuff that there was I don't know, man. I don't know that stuff as well. But certainly in Greek stuff, there was plenty of like, well, not plenty. There were
Yeah.
examples of gods dying and rising from the dead.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, and I'm not just trying to like slough you off. I'm just saying like your argument is right, and not me on this. Like he's done the research, and I don't have it all in front of me.
There is a substantial paradigm shift in that it was not a wide-held belief. There was some scattered belief, but there was not a wide-held belief in the United States that there was an ancient Western Hemispheric civilization called Zarahemla, or that Jesus had appeared to them and had a parallel set of. I mean,
Like the Native American stuff and all that?
right.
Yeah.
That's well. There is some scattered of that, but that represents. Well, I mean, you can't say that the LDS represent theological continuity with
Those around.
Protestant
Right.
America.
And you talked about, how when Jesus died, and everything was going wrong, and then people still believed afterwards. There were plenty of predictions made by LDS church leaders which were proven very, very wrong. There's still an LDS.
Right.
Well, that's what we talked about, like the end times thing too, with that cargo cult. Like the same thing, like where they say
Yeah.
we wanted to wait in 60
But the
years.
difference is all this is written after their hopes were crushed. Like it wasn't that they made like it's the way that the disciples understood this stuff. It's not like the cargo cult. It's like, oh, all these good things are happening, and it's going to happen again, and we'll just wait and wait and wait and wait. But for the Jewish mind, like when the Messiah comes, he's fixing it. So if the Messiah dies, it means he's not a Messiah. Like it invalidates his Messiahship at that point. Like you don't see that anywhere of the Messiah dying.
But the desire to believe is incredibly powerful, right? I mean, we're so far removed from this, yet there are people who vehemently believe based on the credibility of these writings,
Yeah.
much less if you're not very far removed from the event to say, hey, I believe this guy, he's telling me that this actually happened and it wasn't that long ago. I
Sure.
remember seeing or hearing about this guy in other places.
Sure.
That overwhelming desire for people to believe in something is not out of bounds to think that there could be some other
but the two things is
explanation
that
for.
They don't believe. Like they betray him and run away and abandon him. And then second, Paul and James never believed. They had no
But there are
desire
plenty
to
of people who have never believed in anything in their life and they come to Christianity and they have nothing even close to the types of witness accounts that are that close to an event, right? I mean, you could,
Well, I would argue that they do. You just would reject sort of an existential type art, but I think it's completely valid. But Paul's like killing the church. And it's not that someone came and witnessed him, sir, may I tell you about the Lord Jesus Christ? Like no one did that. And so this desire to believe that you're referring to is not present in Paul. Who's the second one to write in the New Testament? James?
Right,
And
but
Paul.
there could be, you can't underestimate the impact, obviously, of a singular, psychologically traumatic event, whatever the road to Damascus. Obviously, you would say that was Christ, appearing to him, but we don't know. There could be other explanations for that kind of event. We do know that, people have, for instance, near-death experiences have tremendous impact
Sure.
on people. How many times, plenty of people come to all kinds of different faiths because they almost died, and famously, Martin Luther, supposedly, that lightning storm that he was caught in, and his promise was, God, if you get me out of it, basically, alive, I'll dedicate the rest of my life to you as a priest. And that's what he did because he survived. There's plenty of near.
That was also the culture this time.
To what?
Well, Christianity was very prevalent in the culture this time.
Sure.
Paul's persecuting, the church is a bug for him to step on. Is it theoretically possible? Maybe, but I don't think it's a very good explanation of the historical facts.
There are plenty of people today who see God, or who Jesus appears to, and which makes them do plenty of things which are countercultural, namely suicide bombers or mass shooters, that kind of thing. So a Christian example being the guy who shot up the youth camp in Scandinavia. He thought that God told him to kill all his kids, and even though that's very countercultural, and he could very well be executed if he weren't in certain socially liberal countries.
Right,
sure.
Or in Islam you have suicide bombers, for example,
Right.
who think so. It's not part of a lot of people's culture to go blow up a lot of your friends down the street, but
Right.
I think God's peace.
Or not your friends. But I'm not sure that like this the Norwegian, Scandinavian, or I forget what he was.
Norway.
It was Norway.
It was Norway.
So this Norwegian guy had the same hallucination as like all these other folks. That's the trouble with the hallucination theory, is that you've got multiple ones that are all like consistent with each
At
other.
least reported though, right? Because again, this is the problem with the fact that this isn't happening today where we have like mass cameras and like video cameras and like things to record all this. Like the fact is like because of the lack of certainly like outside corroborating evidence. Like all right, back quickly, like you mentioned like Josephus and then like I mentioned like about Tacitus. Both of them though, the only thing that they say is he died. They don't like make any kind of remarks about resurrections or anything like that. So, like, the point is, because of the lack of this kind of evidence, how do we know, really, that all of these people, to be quite frank, and I'm not saying that this is, like, what happened by any means, I'm not saying I believe this, but, there could, you could have had one or a few guys, I'm not saying I believe this, but they could have made it all up, and then, like, you get enough, few people to believe, and then it just passes on, and it becomes like a bigger deal, like the you were saying with like the family with Joseph Smith, like if they were all in on it, right?
Right.
And then look today, like what is there, 3 million or no, what? Many million like Mormons now, and any number of religions. You have like all these people that follow, so it could really. It sounds bad, like make them out to be like these devious, dudes that want to deceive people. But we certainly are aware of plenty of devious people in the world that do horrible shit all the time. So, isn't that much of a stretch to think, well, some of these guys, made up and said, okay, this is what we're gonna, this is our story, and then they just, they spread it, and because after that it becomes, well, I heard it from Bob, and I trust Bob because he's my brother or whatever, and so like. And then you believe it, and it can pass on rather quickly at that point.
The strength of the hallucination hypothesis, to me, is that it explains these martyrs, which we know actually did happen. There's some other historical writings.
Yeah, more or less, we have some, right?
So, if you were to say that a bunch of people got together and said, all right, so our Messiah is dead, what are we going to do? And it's like, well, we'll just say he rose 3 days later, and we all saw him, okay? And then you're expected to believe that they went to their death for that. I don't think that explains that. The hallucination hypothesis goes a length towards explaining that, in my mind at least, that they actually believed it.
It might
or
not
for them to just go to their death because
but we
I
don't.
don't want him to be Messiah.
But we don't know if the people that actually would have created the deception were the ones that died. Other people buying into it very much could die for not knowing that it was a deception to begin with. You see what I'm saying?
To be
We
real,
still have two problems. The tomb, which has someone in it. So even if the hallucination, or the sort of conspiracy theory, you still had an empty tomb that you had to go deal with. Are you still? Yeah.
But that's not that hard to do, right? We already. Because that part of it isn't that fanciful. You could easily take a body out.
Right. And you still had to convince skeptics like Paul and James who would not just go from being like Paul was as anti-church as you could get, a Pharisee of Pharisees, and then he flips over and now he's having to go, imagine, he's having to go in and apologize to churches and say, I'm sorry I killed your buddies, but you need to listen to what I have to say to you because it's true. Like, that's compelling. And even to go to his death. Like, neither of those theories, the hallucination or the conspiracy, explain Paul and James.
And you have to go through a whole lot of logistical jumps, logical gymnastics to reach the point where it was a conspiracy.
I don't even agree with this hallucination theory. My theory would be that Jesus Christ never existed in the first place. If you go back in early historic recorded history, and you look at how all the early Christian tribes went back and altered or just destroyed all the records or the Roman records. Pontius Pilate's trial, they would have those records but they had been either altered or destroyed.
Well, what about
And there had-
Tacitus and Josephus, though? They weren't Christians. And
There had to be something in there. Yeah, they didn't. There had to be something in those early records that says that either Jesus Christ didn't resurrect, he wasn't, or he didn't exist at all to begin with, for them to even go back and alter them. So the fact that they did destroy them, alter them, tells us that Jesus Christ probably never did exist in the first place.
yeah, I think that's like a very fringe and kind of maverick view. I don't think it really has very much.
That's
Not
my
at this
view.
point.
That's definitely not. And
Right, I definitely, unfortunately, it's not history's view, and since that's what we're talking about, you got a little bit of it.
It's not history's view at this point. There is starting to be a little bit, there is some more stuff in that area, but
Well,
it is pretty limited.
right, I have a feeling the facilitator of that comment.
Yeah, well, first I just want to say this from Brad, but the second thing I want to do, I do want to squarely talk for a moment at least about this mass experience hallucination thing. And a really good example of this is Fatima, where
What?
is Our Lady of Fatima, where you have, which is probably the most widely, yeah,
Okay, fine, okay.
which is probably the most widely believed, certainly within Christianity, probably in the world, is probably the most widely believed in miracle of the 20th century. Where you have in Fatima, Portugal, there are these 3 kids in 1917 who said that Mary, the Mary, appeared to them and was talking to them over a period of time, and then they said that there was going to be a big sign on October 13th, 1917. Tens of thousands of people gathered, and a lot of people walked away from that saying that the sky changed color and the sun dropped out. And there's quite a bit, and this was a huge gathering of tens of thousands of people. The press was there. I brought with me, it's a little show and tell. This is the newspaper from the local newspaper that has tons of photographs of these large people who are eyewitnessing this while they're eyewitnessing this. I'll pass that out. The quality of the photograph is very good, but it's believed in by a lot of Christians, but although apparently not so much around here, but I'm not sure why, but those who don't believe in it, that's either going to be, I mean, it seems like your only 2 scenarios are that it's, because those people have never met each other, and this is tons of people kind of coming in from all over the place, that either it's true, which a number of people believe, or that it is a group hysteria, hallucination type of situation. So that
Group hysteria is a known psychological phenomenon, too.
But group hallucination isn't. Like,
Yeah.
if it is, like, well, that'd be like the only instance where you could say, like, yes, it happened. Of course, I mean, like, I was a psychology major. No, that doesn't mean anything. But I just like took classes and stuff like that, and this would be like the only event where if group hallucinations exist, that it happened. Which then I kind of like I'd flip it over to you and say, like, how do you explain that there's a one-off event here, and even if it was a group hallucination. Like, I still don't know that it would explain everything about Jesus'
What about,
resurrection.
it's not necessarily a group hallucination, right? It's a group of people who had, there was a common thread among those people, but they were all independently having other people hallucinations, or there were different visions from different sources, and they all came together under the guise that we all believe in this sort of Catholic idea of Jesus and Mary and all this sort of stuff, right? I mean, so there was that common thread, and then there were individual hallucination type things.
But you can
Well,
also,
and there's some overlap, at least. I mean, there's a lot of dispute about the things, but there's some. But there's
At least
there's an overlap of the description of the subjectivity of the experience.
Yeah.
That's
What is there a problem if we say it's true? I mean, like, what would that do? Would that freak you guys out? Or
I mean, honestly,
I would agree.
honestly,
of course.
so here's my question: if you've you've got that and the press is there and everything else, is the reason that you don't believe it, and the thing, I don't know anything about this, I don't know what I think about it, all right? But it's the reason that you wouldn't believe that something happened based on like your evidence, who was there, what they said, and, like, is the reason you wouldn't believe it based on a prior assumption.
Yes, the sun goes up, the sun comes down, the tide goes in,
Yeah.
the tide goes out.
Right.
It doesn't have
The answer is
one.
no. The answer is the opposite of what perhaps.
The thing is that
You can't get love.
what I would say about the resurrection is like, given all these different things that we've been talking about, and especially like these 5 facts that I don't feel like any theory other than the resurrection itself satisfies these 5 things. It seems like the only reason to deny it is that you say, all right, here's the evidence, here's everything that we've seen, but it can't be true because of what I believe.
No,
And I'd say like,
I deny it because I don't have personal experience. Saul was struck blind in the desert, and Jesus appeared to him and talked to him. And Saul was didn't like Christians, like he was persecuting them. So like, I'm not persecuting anyone by any means. I'm not hanging people up or anything like that. But like, as an non-believer, like if something like that can happen to someone that doesn't believe, like why not me? If he cares so much about my eternal soul, why can't he prove to me in a real way, like what was done in the books?
I would I'd take it a step further. I'd say I wouldn't believe. I think personal experience, while we do use it obviously for most things, but personal experience and like eyewitnesses and stuff like that, it gets very unreliable.
right.
Like I would want like peer-reviewed, like beyond a shadow of a doubt, like really laid down good evidence.
So you don't believe anything past like
I mean,
1800?
Personally, I wouldn't even need.
Well, all right.
If it were a strong enough something, I'm
Like
struck
God came down
blind,
and showed
and
you.
he's talking in my head, and I'm like, holy crap, what is this?
You
It's
might
like,
think you're
my
tripping
God.
on like
That's what I was
something
gonna
you
say.
don't know.
Like you could also just look and say, oh, I must have had something weird or something.
That would yeah.
But my point is that given a certain worldview, given that like this couldn't happen, miracles can't happen, there isn't any amount of evidence that's going to overturn it. It's just not like, and I would say, and respectfully, all right, and I know most of you, and so you know that I'm not just like lobbing things out. I would say, given the amount of like what we have here that I've been going over, sort of that to not believe in the resurrection is to value your beliefs over like historical fact, and it's actually the blind faith that so many folks accuse Christians of. And again, I say that respectfully. I don't,
Yeah.
many of you know me.
Blind faith and what?
that it didn't happen.
Blind faith that the supernatural like can't happen.
Right. But Trey, I think that the issue is, and Grant was very correct to bring up Sappho, which is a really good example, and as someone who is believed by those around him to be God and performed miracles on YouTube. You can watch his miracles on YouTube.
Really?
Are
Are they in
in
town?
public? Yeah, it's in public. But so I mean, we have that example, and then I talked about Smith and Fatima. That it seems, I think that the issue that some of us are having is that you don't believe in those. And
That's the other thing, yeah.
and we're seeing a series of at least comparable. I would argue some of those other events have a stronger body of reasons for. But we're seeing a bunch of this stuff, and we're seeing one of them kind of getting pulled out. We're not understanding what's so different about that one from these others.
That was exactly what I was thinking too, because like you have like, I mean, all religions have some fantastical claims, supernatural claims, somewhere involved, beginning, middle, end, whatever. And that's the thing too. Like it's the fact you're saying there's a particular nature to the claims about Jesus, but like I can point to Greek mythology and say that like at one time, the Greeks believe this, and this actually happened.
And then you can look at the other stuff from there of like, say the LDS church and even Islam's.
Right.
The Quran talks a lot about Jesus and his resurrection with different accounts of what that means and what that has to be lived by.
Right.
So you can say, well, I live by the Bibles, but not say the Quran's interpretation of what Jesus
The
resurrected.
Quran's also way late.
Let's
It
not
is.
let's not assume that you know we just we just privilege this resurrection thing, and we don't even think about the others. I mean, we look into those ones too. I mean, it's not as if.
Well, you wouldn't like accept Muhammad's claim that an angel, that Gabriel actually like gave him those visions or whatever. I mean, that's the thing.
In a cave by himself. Like, I do think
Yeah,
there's
see,
some
I-
differences between these.
I would
I think
reject
that's
them.
fair to say.
I would
Even
reject them,
Smith's-
but it wouldn't be on the basis of my worldview. It would be on the basis of
The merits of
evidence.
what happened.
Yeah.
What about there's a claim, I think maybe it was Hitchens's, I'm not sure, but it's that thing that about like basically demanding. Oh, and actually this is what JT brought up on Thursday. Yeah, extraordinary claims demand basically extraordinary evidence. That and it was Carrier's example he brought up, but like the claim, I have a car, I have an interstellar spacecraft, and I have a nuclear missile, that was it.
Right.
So like the claim, I have a car, like most people aren't going to demand that much evidence of that because that's not an extraordinary claim at all. I mean, probably most of us in this room own a vehicle, or at least know multiple people that do.
Right.
The nuclear missile claim is probably going to demand a lot more evidence, but at least we know nuclear missiles exist and they things like that. But again, unless you're maybe Kim Jong Un, we're not going to buy that from you. And even then,
trust him.
And even then, we're a little unsure.
He's
I think what's missing from all of any claims like that, including the Roman religious beliefs, is the idea of a personal path of a life journey. And that thread that's in there keeps the thing alive, it keeps it more connected, and you more connected to it to try to discover those answers. And some people will die thinking they had the answers from the beginning. Some will die thinking, well, I had it wrong all along and believe in this Bible thing. I think that as a human connection point is more powerful among the Bible. And even the story of resurrection, the redemption element that's there is still pervasive in literature today. There's still this desire to connect to that sort of thing. And that's why this is more powerful than those other religions or even these extraordinary
people will
claims.
die though in name of all kinds of religions. I mean, I don't know. But, I mean, what about this is an earlier topic with the mental illness thing? Most people today that do things like, mass murder a camp full of kids or, shoot up a movie theater or any number of things, we would say there was something wrong, mentally with them.
Yeah, I just disagree because what happens with one individual in nature isn't true for all of nature. I can't resurrect when I die. And I think it's a cop-out to say that Jesus resurrected in bodily form and ascended in heaven as a full body human. And that's just a cop-out because we can't see him on earth. He's not here as a resurrection figure that still persists.
Well,
there will be no convincing it that when the generations continue to have this, like our boss always says, picture didn't happen belief, that it's just, I need the evidence, I need to see this, or and there is something we said about being open to an experience. If you're not, in discussions I've had with my mom, she's just, she'll constantly say, you're just not, if you're not open to it, you're never going to be able to have those experiences that I've had, speaking as herself. And I kind of agree with that. If I'm not open to them, then I can't have them. And I think you're going to see that more and more, that you're going to have to come up against it, you and Curry especially, that this generation of, I have a lot of evidence around me, or I have scientific evidence to support even things I can't see, quantum mechanics and stuff. I can't see that stuff, but there's enough of evidence of how we view the world that allows me to believe in those things. This is too far removed from all that stuff. You can't scientifically, you can throw around the word theory enough, but it's still all speculation.
Well, I
It's
said
still
historically, to be fair.
Right.
Because you can't scientifically prove Augustus Caesar and stuff like
True,
that.
right.
Yeah.
But there is a shit ton more evidence to suggest that he did the stuff he did.
Is that a metric?
Yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
14 in Rome.
Well, we're past time,
Right.
and so like I'd love to like I could keep talking for another 30 minutes, but I do want to. I think that the facilitators are with me that we want to respect y'all's time when we set it to 7:30. It's to 7:30, so at this point, like feel free. Like you're not going to offend anyone if you
leave.
right. But we can certainly keep going too.
Earlier you said that the most important, and this is what I was going to say earlier,
Okay.
wait until then. You said that the resurrection was the most important doctrine of Christianity. Wouldn't the origination of sin be the most important? Otherwise, Jesus' life and death would...
Yeah.
But that is like a pivotal.
Yeah.
The resurrection is still a pivotal.
I'll just take a step back and have cake on my face and say one of, amend my.
Oh, no, not what I'm saying at all, but is it, for the origination of sin, like, do you see that as a metaphor? Is that like Adam and Eve, is that a literal story?
Yeah, I think it was a little story.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was. And there are some theologians that think that even if sin had never entered into the world, and this is a huge hypothesis, and this is low on the percentages of things I'm going to be certain about, but that Jesus would have still been resurrected. Incarnated. He obviously wouldn't even be resurrected. But anyway, that's all. That's kind of like we're sort of rearranging furniture on the third floor. Instead of talking about the first floor.
So I think we can wrap things up.
Well, I mean, I thought we already said like you could leave. If
Yeah.
you wanted to.
Yeah, I just figured he was going to...
Well, yeah, I just want to make
Yeah.
sure people don't need to leave, couldn't do so. But Trey, we do really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Your presentation, you did a very good job. And
Thank you.
Thanks for
handled this well.
Thanks for proposing it
I just appreciate it.
bold.
I'll say this, that this, Deeper Questions, has actually been one of my favorite things about it. This is my first year here, if you didn't know. It's my first year out of seminary, first year, like, my first real job, if you will. Yeah, and I just turned 30. Isn't that embarrassing? But Jesus started when he was 30. But
Collecting yourself. This is recorded right after you got that.
but I want to, at a purely personal level, to thank Everett. Everett came up to me at Razor Bash and invited me to come. And if I'm being honest, I was like, is this just going to be like Christian bashing? And this has been one of my favorite things I've done here. Like, I write newsletters to, the people who follow my ministry and that sort of thing. And I rave about this. I'm like, this is so much fun.